Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for People Strategy for the Future of Work virtual conference presented by Engagedly. This webcast has been pre-approved for a half HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, please use the Q&A box or the chat box on your Zoom controls. We hope you are enjoying the event so far. Our next webcast is How Inclusive Leadership Fuels the Talent Lifecycle of the Future. Our guest speaker today, Jennifer Brown, envisions inclusive organizations where all of us can thrive. Jennifer is an award-winning entrepreneur, dynamic speaker, and diversity and inclusion expert. She is the founder and CEO of Jennifer Brown Consulting, and her consulting firm guides some of the world's largest companies in their diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Jennifer Brown.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be spending this time with you. As was mentioned, I focus on inclusive leadership, and I come from the human resources world. Actually, I have a graduate degree in organizational change and started out as a facilitator of leadership programs and a trainer, and then pivoted into DEIB, which is DEI and belonging, which some of you may or may not be familiar with that, but that's an emerging part of the acronym as it develops. And it's been an incredible journey for us and my team. We get to impact so many folks around the world and so many organizations in their thinking and in their practices, and in supporting them with best practices so that they can pivot and meet this moment that we're in, which is intense and full of potential. So as I speak to HR audiences, I know, and I want to thank you all and acknowledge what you do to grow leaders every day and to not only keep organizations safe, but also healthy and thriving. And I'm sure, like me, we're all learning so much and being challenged by the current environment, by the changes in generational expectations amongst our talent, and also the role of the organization in the larger context, in the larger issues of the day, and the voice of employers, and the privilege that they have to express allyship on the stage, the public stage. So there's a lot going on. It's a very dynamic environment, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I enjoy thinking through these things. So if you have questions as I present for about 10 minutes now, we can get to your questions after my short presentation. So as you heard, please use the Q&A or the chat. Either way, we'll see it, and we'll be in a fireside chat dialogue for the last 20 minutes that we have together today. All right, so let me jump in. So I too have a diversity story. I believe everyone has a diversity story, or stories plural. And sometimes these are visible and sometimes they're not. So for me, I came to New York City to be an opera singer. And my first degree is in operatic vocal performance. And I came to, the City of Lights to find my fame and fortune. But unfortunately, I injured myself as I was training so hard for that career, and injured my voice. And I had to get surgery, and several times, unfortunately, and it would forever alter my stamina, my instrument, really my ability to make a living. And, it was heartbreaking and hard to cope with what I thought was losing the means to express myself. Subsequently, of course, life would have other, and I think bigger and better plans for me, but we never know that in the moment. So I would reinvent and find another stage, which was so serendipitous. I would find the training stage, and because there are many ex-performers in the training and development world, in the learning and development world, as all of you probably know. And I flipped over and got another degree in org change, as I said, and really became a facilitator for a living, facilitating leadership conversations in a variety of companies and industries, and starting Jennifer Brown Consulting, and that was almost 20 years ago. So I've grown the team over those years, and now, as I said, we get to focus on building organizational health in places where all of us can feel welcome, valued, respected, and heard. So I like to say I was meant to use my voice, just not as a singer. But the other way that, I wrestled with my voice metaphorically is that I'm a member of the LGBTQ+ community. So I was closeted as a performer. I was out to a couple of friends, but I didn't see anyone that shared my story publicly anyway. And I thought it would really limit my ability to make a living. And then as a corporate person, it was 90s and the aughts, and everybody was closeted at work. And still half of us are still closeted at work, according to recent statistics. 50% of us don't tell the truth at work about who we are in the community. And then, I would subsequently become women-owned certified, LGBT-owned certified as I built JBC, and kind of come out and come to the front about it. But what's most important to recognize is that this is a lifelong struggle for all of us on a host of diversity dimensions. So, on the next slide, I really want us to think about, to what degree are our organizations places where people can actually bring their full selves to work. There's a lot of jargon and corporate speak about we are a place where you could bring your full self to work. But, in my data collection and our team's experience and my personal experience, there's still so many identities that carry stigma that we are hesitant to bring to the surface and show, because we anticipate, rightly or wrongly, that it's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt our professional trajectory. It's going to limit our opportunities. And so we kind of bargain constantly with, where do I set the waterline of my iceberg? And what we know about icebergs, of course, is very little of them is visible, right? And then the big and dangerous truth, the truth of an iceberg is under the waterline, it's invisible. And I love this metaphor because it also speaks to all the invisible aspects of diversity, right? The things that we can either just minimize, downplay, not clarify, not elaborate on, not bring into the room. Like, for example, being LGBTQ plus, like I don't need to, it's often assumed that I'm not a part of that community, based on a lot of things that people see, right? Their stereotypes, their biases about what a person looks like in the community. So the choices we make constantly around our psychological safety of, what is going to hurt me and what is going to enable me. And I think it's, I've been adding to all of these aspects under the waterline over the last 2 years, especially as I've delivered this virtually, probably hundreds of times. And people have been chatting in and saying, oh, this is true for me. And this is my experience too. We've been adding to it because there's so much that's not verbalized, that's not therefore seen and therefore resourced, therefore destigmatized and supported proactively. So in kind of having these things remain under the waterline, it might make us feel like we're doing something to keep ourselves safe. But I would argue that leadership entails growth. It entails getting comfortable being uncomfortable. So the challenge I always give myself is how can I lower that waterline? How can I take a risk? How can I lead with vulnerability? How can I role model if I'm in a position of authority? How can I role model what this looks like so that future generations and existing talent can see what this looks like and feel the impact of it, which I would argue is oftentimes positive when we don't think that it will be, because we're never alone in what we're struggling with. So I don't have time today to go through all these descriptors under the waterline, but something to think about for HR professionals as you support your business leaders. They all have an iceberg. I mean, every human has an iceberg, right? So the question I would be asking is, what is mine? But also, how can I help leaders lead in a different way, given that how they're being asked to lead is different now, and it has changed, and it will continue to change, and it will entail vulnerability, humility, transparency, being more of a whole leader, because that is what is being asked for and demanded, especially by younger talent coming into the organization. And so, so that's the iceberg. And then, when I think about our work as learners, we're on a progression. We're either in the beginning stages of understanding things like other ethnicities than our own, or disabilities, right, that we don't have direct or primary experience with. And then we may be in the advanced stages around something we carry as a lived experience, carry as an identity, because or a loved one carries that identity. And so this model I came up with in the How to Be an Inclusive Leader, the book, and have delivered it, in hundreds of conversations and explained sort of how we go from Unaware, which is, okay, I don't know there's a problem. I don't think I'm biased. I'm a good person, and therefore I'm having an impact on equity around me. It can be resistance in unaware for sure, but it can really be doing nothing because I don't think diversity has anything to do with me. And I find I encounter a lot of leaders in unaware, and I think you probably will all agree. And maybe you look at this and you say, "Gosh, I think I may be in unaware," which is fair. And we purposely need to seek exposure to things that we aren't naturally or day to day exposed to. Things, people, stories, narratives, statistics, research, facts. We exist in our bubbles, and so it's not for me to judge the fact that we find ourselves here, but it is incumbent, I think, on all of us to continue to develop the discipline of growth. So the growth then out of unaware is to aware, which is, okay, now I know what I don't know, right? And it's a lot. I wasn't taught. I never was exposed. I know nobody who identifies this way in my life. I don't know the first thing about this community. And I think in aware, it's the knowledge gathering and learning stage. And it's so important. And we're always here, right? I mean, there's so many, I do this for a living, and I'm constantly returning to aware and saying, where do I have gaps in my knowledge? Where do I not know enough? Where do I not know anything? And I think about different identities, like disabilities, like veterans, like, every sort of demographic in the workplace that hasn't been represented. I I put my attention on that, and I want to learn about it. And I also want to share my privileged identities as well, to also role model that we are many puzzle pieces. And while I might have some identities that have led to bias and marginalization, I also have some identities that allow me to be an insider in certain conversations, rooms, and give me a voice and give me permission to influence and change the system around me. So the awareness piece is that deep dive into your iceberg, but I don't want to forget the privilege piece too, because we are many things. We don't need, none of us is a single story. So, but then if we move from aware into active, which is phase 3, we take that knowledge and we begin to apply it. And this is the experimental phase. And it can be scary and uncertain. And many people, I think, get stuck here because they're worried about not showing up perfectly. But I say imperfection is not only the goal, it's the reality. We are all imperfect. We will not know the words. We will not know how to begin conversations. It will feel like a new language and a new terrain. And that's take the growth mindset, go back and read Carol Dweck's work and say, how do I fail forward, and how am I agile to the learning and responsive to feedback, and don't get my ego involved, and I'm humble to the growth. That's what happens in this stage. And we build that muscle, right? That we can begin to lift heavier and heavier weights because we're practicing, what it looks like to be in the inclusion conversation and in the work. And then finally, phase 4 is advocate, which is, okay, this is I know what to do. I know when to say it. I know how to use my voice. I'm fearless. I'm relentless. I am courageous. I am consistent and insistent on change. And this is, I think, a aspirational phase that we develop the muscle to be someday. And again, though, being, phase 4 around many different identities, like, is probably impossible. I mean, that's my job. that's what I need to have under my belt. But it can also be exhausting when we push ourselves to be at this level, but not feel the allyship and the partnership of others because they're not quite ready to partner and to show up, so that we can have, like, many hands make lighter work on inclusion work. So we can think about this as an ally continuum if you want to, and it makes a lot of sense. It's the journey we travel. And I think meeting people where they're at is really important. So we have an assessment that we'll share the link of for you. And I would encourage you to take the assessment and also use it with your leaders and think about this model, and maybe read the book together or suggest it for your executive leaders who really tend to like this approach, because there's no shame and blame in this approach. This is absolutely acknowledging kind of where we are, and that it's a mixed bag, and that the only thing that really matters is forward movement and commitment. And also ultimately impact, not just intent. But intent is a great place to start. All right. So with that, that's really all that I wanted to share with all of you. And there's some more information about us here on the slide. We have a QR code if you're curious to find out more about what we're up to, which is really exciting stuff. Please check out the self-assessment. You've got the link in the bottom of the slide. And my podcast is called The Will to Change. So this is the kind of stuff we talk about all the time on The Will to Change. I have amazing guests on. Sometimes it's just me riffing, but I would love to know that you all are tuning in and continuing your learning in that way. So let me now transition to Jacqueline's going to join me, and we're going to kick around some questions that we prepared for everybody. And please, if you have questions, you're being a little quiet out there, but I know you have questions on this topic. So do not be shy, because you asking something probably means that it's a question that a lot of other people have on their minds and hearts too. So no such thing as, I won't even say the S word question. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. We do have a list of questions, and let's get started with those. My first question to you is, why is inclusive leadership a critical component for tomorrow's talent strategies?
Oh my goodness. Well, many people will say, well, inclusive leadership is good leadership. Yes. And yet I don't think we've really defined it, nailed it down, rewarded it, trained for it. Some of you are probably in companies and you're thinking to yourselves, how do we measure inclusion? I mean, maybe you measured diversity, and that is in some ways, some kinds of diversity are easier to measure because it's counting heads, right? It's sort of the demographics that they are what they are. Although I would argue we're horrible at measuring like sexual orientation diversity and gender identity diversity and disabilities, because those things are so stigmatized. But measuring inclusion is that next piece, and even defining what that is, whether and those competencies, and then supporting a leader to grow in their humility, in their transparency, in their emotional intelligence, in their ability to, listen and be responsive and not have all the answers, but just ask the best questions. So I know we probably all agree that's good leadership, but I don't think we've put a fine point on it, and we haven't kind of built the organizational accountability to encourage it or require it. And those are kind of two, that's the carrot and the stick approach. The carrot is like, hey, we invite you to change with the times. We invite you to, jump into this and put some time towards it, because it's going to be what is rewarded and continue to make you relevant and effective as a leader, because we have to know how to manage across difference. But there's also the stick, which is, HR programs that, you all are involved in, which is, let's bake this into our performance management and expectation, and let's make it real and concrete for people. And I think, different people listen to different, heed the call differently, right? Some are early adopters, some are laggards, and some are sort of in this middle where they're learning, but they need to kind of accelerate that. And I think an organization can put some pressure on that. But make sure not to ask people to meet certain metrics that they are not trained or prepared to meet, because that will be an exercise in futility as well.
Agreed. In the second edition of your book, you've really driven home that focus of equity. Why was that such an important topic for you to address?
Oh, goodness. Well, rewriting a book after 3 or 4 years, and especially after these 3 or 4 years, equity has come to the fore. And I've even deepened, my team and I and all practitioners have deepened our own understanding of the difference between equality and equity. I'll just start with that, which is, equality is a goal, right? It's that city on a hill, that shining example, that thing that we want, that we won't ever probably experience in our lifetimes, of course. But equity to me is a strategy. It's the discipline of looking under every rock of every system, everything that we've taken for granted, everything that has felt perhaps comfortable for some of us, the recognition that it hasn't felt comfortable or fair for others, and a courage to look at those things and tackle systemic bias at the root. And I can promise you all, you probably know this, your HR people, bias, it lives and is lurking in every single system, because the workplace we are working within was built many, many, many decades ago. And I think we're tweaking, right? We're sort of changing it, but I don't think it's at all been washed through the equity lens. and a lot of other lenses too, right? So, and it wasn't built by a diverse, in every way, I mean diverse, a diverse group of stakeholders. So we weren't at the table constructing this workplace. And so as such, there are the I don't want to, I'm trying to not say blind spots, by the way. I'm trying to shift my language, which is just a pro tip for all of you. And I am learning. There are things that a homogeneous group of white male leaders, for example, who built that workplace and continue to actually dominate the leadership ranks. There are things that groups are not going to see. There are things they're not going to think about. There are things that there are lenses through which they probably cannot look at things that need to be addressed or redesigned or, start, stop, continue, or whatever. Like that whole process, I think, is hard for people that don't have the lived experience, unless they're pretty far on the continuum and they've been really applying themselves as allies. So yeah, so I think we have some work to do on equity, and equity is justice, it's fairness, it's also sees difference. Like equality tells us I don't see color, right? I'm trying to be equal in my approach. We don't say that anymore. And we understand that effectively was an erasure of difference. And so equity to me wants to see the differences. It wants to analyze and assume that differences are making a difference for people in the same system. And that's not fair. So equity also makes room for differential investments, differential strategies to lift up talent of certain identities who have been the victims of bias, who have subtle ways and overt ways, who look at the pay gap. Like, how did that happen? How would we have let that happen, right? Because we didn't look at it, and we didn't look at it through that lens forever. And now we are, but there's still persistent pay gaps everywhere. So that's just one example of something that I think most people aren't aware that exists. And we have to raise awareness that this and everything else really needs to be rethought.
It's really hard to challenge a system whenever you're benefiting from it, which kind of takes me over to my next question, which is privilege. It has a loaded topic for many people. And in the book, you talk about refraining from the concept of privilege as a call in to leaders instead of a call out. Why is that framing privilege in this way so important?
Well, privilege just is. I know it's been weaponized. I know that it's been used to discredit and push certain people out and say, you don't have anything to contribute because of who you are, where you were born, what skin color you have, whatever. Like that's been, whether that's been the intention or not, that has pushed a lot of people out of the conversation. So we are where we are. Right. I'm not negating that some people carry, and I am one of the people that carry a lot of privilege. So I can say this, and I think it's important for people who identify as I do, or with parts of how I do, that we talk about it, and not, I just don't think it's helpful to make it such a scary topic that it literally is never talked about, because there is so much opportunity to use privileges as tools to change systems, to do that equity work that we were just discussing. There is so much opportunity to make daily and hourly decisions, utilizing the fact that you can get in the room, you can have the conversations, you can push things, you can have somebody's back, you can lift up and nominate and sponsor someone. I apologize, my camera is being weird. It happens. So there's so much you can use. And if we have a bunch of folks who are terrified of even naming it, even to themselves, and then being told that it makes you sort of an unhelpful person, and not only that, a kind of destructive person. When was the last time we felt the energy and we felt confident in contributing when we're being told that we're harming the whole system and the whole effort? Like, it's just not, it's not how humans work. So what I would like is a true discussion, and privilege with a small p, all the privileges, all the ways that, life and circumstances, both acquired privilege and also inborn privilege. What are we born with? Skin color, whatever it is that, makes, speeds us along in this life. And then also acquired is like things that happen in our lives, and choices we make, parenting, religious and spiritual beliefs, whatever. So schools that we choose to go to, and therefore are, regarded in a certain way and given a pass in certain ways. So I think all of this is very relevant because they are our change tools, particularly those of us who are sitting on the sidelines because we're more comfortable in certain systems. The work is to get off the sidelines and contribute. And honestly, it's not just for the benefit of others, it transforms us. Yeah, this work always transforms us. It forces, us to look at all of who we are. It forces us to think about, how am I giving back? Forces us to say, where don't I feel like I have a voice? But at the end of the day, the gratification of having the tools in you to utilize to shift a system is such a far cry from, oh, I need to be not part of this conversation because I'm scared. I don't know what to say. I don't want to mess up, whatever. Like, let's counter that with all the ways and all the things that I can be doing. And let's start with that. And then hopefully we build our expertise from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The book, you talk a lot about that concept of falling forward. And is this why is this such an important aspect in the leader journey? Excuse me.
Oh boy. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll bring up my generation again, who inherited the expectations and the norms from the generations before us. And I think still sort of haunt the organization of today, which is that, the leader is command and control. The leader knows all the answers. The leader has all the answers. When it comes to inclusive leadership, there is the trick, and the art of it is to show up and lead, but in a very different way. And so, why don't you repeat your question, because I want to make sure that I'm getting it exactly right, Jacqueline. Let me pause and ask you to
Sure.
make sure I'm not answering what I want to answer.
You talk a lot about the concept of falling forward. Yeah. Why is this such an important aspect of the inclusive leader journey?
Yes. So thank you. It's falling forward. It's also failing forward, which is Carol Dweck's growth mindset. It is when you think about all the ways in which we experiment as leaders in organizations, right? We experiment with new products, we experiment with new processes, we tweak, and yet there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for leaders to grow and get feedback and adjust. And this is one piece I would beseech everyone listening to think about, like, how do we create enough psychological safety, because everybody needs psychological safety, for leaders to fail forward, and meaning that they are being resilient to feedback, that they're taking that in, that they're not, shamed in the process, which I think is sort of a deterrent to learning and progress. And that we each need to have everyone's back. It's not that I just need to have, people's back that haven't been heard and seen and valued in the workplace. Absolutely. But I do think too, leaders inhabit a very, very critical role. And in many ways, depending on their generation and their identity, they're lagging far behind on the vocabulary, the context, the confidence, the conversation tools. And so the catch up, the learning curve is extremely steep for certain generations and certain identities. And yet the groups for whom it is the most steep also have the most power in the system. So when you look at the combination of that, to me, it's logical to invest in my support of leaders. And I like to flip the allyship, concept of, I'm the leader and I'm somebody's ally, and sort of lifting them up, right? I like to think of it as 360-degree leadership. And I think supporting a leader from any point in the organization, any level, that I can be, I feel my allyship is very activated when I'm in, for example, men's conferences, when we talk about inclusive leadership for male leaders, and I feel very much there for their journey. And I very much feel I'm putting everything I have in play to support that leader, because I know that they turn around and support and can create such a different experience for people and generations of people. And it's their own way to transform too. It's not just for those that they touch on a day-to-day basis. So anyway, so that ability to show up in the imperfection is really the competency that we need to measure and reward the progress of, rewarding imperfection, but great effort, great intent, great effort, And then we need to tweak the impact, right? And we learn over time, what can I do to get this result or that result, or what's really meaningful, or how do I tell my story? Like all that is really beautiful to investigate. And so, but yeah, to get comfortable being uncomfortable, not something we've incentivized, not something that leaders have had role modeled for them. And yet I think is going to be incredibly important for successful leaders in the future.
Got it. Now, when it comes to, I want to touch on something that you said, becoming an ally or an advocate. On the journey as an ally, how should you gather feedback on what more you need to learn to understand or to advocate for? How do you go about asking those questions?
Yeah, well, I think you need to know where you're starting from. That next step comes back to, well, where am I? And am I happy with what I'm doing? Am I happy with my pace of growth? And where would I give myself, on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I like an 8 and where am I a 2? And again, like I said, in the continuum, you could take our assessment and you'll get a little bit more of a flavor for this too. That's another data point that you absolutely should do. But I think, thinking about, look, the amount that we don't know is vast. We basically don't know. We're only kind of skin deep on so many different identities that we haven't directly experienced. And that's just true. So given that, I would create a learning plan for myself based on identifying a couple key areas that I really want to progress on. So if I want to progress in my understanding on, gender non-binary folks and they, them pronouns, and creating, psychological safety for sharing pronouns, and understanding what the common microaggressions are, for example, for people who are non-binary. And I want to make my next month of my life about that. I want to watch TV shows about it. I want to read a book by a non-binary person. I want to attend a podcast. I want to befriend a non-binary person in my workplace. So there's action plans you can create and then hold yourself accountable to, and deepen without, I think, a ton of hours. I think you can really deepen your vocabulary, your understanding, your context, and your exposure. And so it just depends how you learn. Like think about how much you can take on. And also I would look at your world, where are you lacking? Where are you? And when you take the assessment, you can kind of think about, where do I have the most biases? Where do I have the least exposure? Where do I have team members or people that I have like sort of available to me, where I can learn and actually have like living, breathing, humans that I can, because, a human is always better than I think reading a book. Like somebody who identifies in a certain way, if you can build trust with someone, it brings what you're studying alive and makes it all real. So I might, grab the low hanging fruit as well. Like when you go through an inventory where you want to start, don't make it, especially hard on yourself necessarily, but like I would build your confidence and build your habit with stuff that's available to you. Use what's available and then build from there. But look, we can't know all the things about everybody, but it's just it's a journey. And I think sinking into the journey and not being so obsessed with the destination and saying like, am I done yet? Are we there yet? It's a lifelong pursuit. And identities are changing constantly. I mean, I try to keep up with even identities in the LGBTQ plus community, and the language is changing. The way people want to be called is changing. So I'm having to go back and check my own generational biases, even around identities that I carry, which is super fascinating and a wonderful opportunity to update my operating system.
Right. And with every day, a little bit of practice amounts to big change later on and down the road.
Yeah. And can I add one more thing? You asked me about how do you know where you are? Then you make a plan, but then you need to run it by people and get how you are impacting, because the intent piece can all be there, but then it can come out sideways. And you're never going to really be able to calibrate your impact until you really have some experience under your belt and people trust you enough to say, this made a difference. Thank you for your allyship. To me, it's those who are being impacted that get to say whether your work and your intention is actually resulting in something. So very, very important to seek feedback. Like, do you feel supported? Is there another way I can support you? Are there conversations or biases that I'm unaware of? in myself, in our team, in our processes, I would constantly be revisiting that and not get our egos involved and get our feelings hurt, because this information is a gift. Feedback is a gift, and doesn't mean you're a bad person, means that you don't have a competency yet, and that but trying is half the battle, and committing to change is the rest of it.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I think we've all learned a lot today, and there's probably going to be more questions. We'll try to get to those after our session. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody.